At E3 last summer, I had a chance to sit in on a presentation for The Outer Worlds, a new game by the fine folks at Obsidian Entertainment. As I sat there in the second row, weighed down by a busy few days spent running from one end of the Los Angeles Convention Center to the other to catch appointments, I initially found it difficult to muster much enthusiasm. That's because the game looked frighteningly similar to Fallout New Vegas, and since Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 had substantially weakened my interest in playing a game so obviously inspired by Bethesda's post-apocalyptic open-world RPG, I had already developed preconceived notions during the demo. When The Outer Worlds came out and generated positive buzz, I decided to check it out and see what people were talking about, secretly hoping it would cure the disappointment I felt towards Borderlands 3. Having dropped nearly 20 hours into the game during my extra live stream this year, I came away believing that this is what a current-gen Fallout game should have been. The player assumes control of a man or woman stationed aboard the Hope, a colony ship meant to make a skip-jump journey to a distant star system and make it livable. Unfortunately, the Hope's jump drive malfunctioned halfway and was forced to make the trip under normal propulsion. 40 years since the Hope was considered lost, eccentric scientist and galactic outlaw Phineas Wells discovers the ship, pulls you out of cryosleep, and shoos you out the door on a mission to help him restore the rest of the frozen colonists. A fish out of water, you'll explore and run missions across a small star system bought and named by the Halcyon Corporation, interacting with its citizen employees who believe the tragedy of the Hope little more than a myth. Halcyon's planets, 4 of which are locked out presumably for future DLC, are identifiable by the various mining and terraforming operations imbued with a corporate culture whose comic relief sometimes hits too close to home. The numerous towns, businesses, and walled cities are occupied by folks working for the weekend and forced to endure all sorts of ridiculous roadblocks, penny pinching, and humiliations inflicted upon them by their oblivious corporate masters. Obsidian's new space-based open-world RPG earns its comparisons to Fallout because it is similar in every possible way. Replacing VATS as a time dilation ability earned after being thawed out from cryosleep, initiating a dialogue with someone always begins with that familiar camera zoom, and you'll always find yourself in the middle of a conflict that can be resolved to favor one side or the other. Your character build is governed by the points you spend in one of many skills that influence specializations, weapon handling, and even dialogue options. High charisma and intelligence scores make it easy to charm folks to your way of thinking, though willingly making your character a dullard, like I did, opens up some hilarious dialogue options that always elicit an amusing response from the people you talk to. The Outer Worlds may walk, talk, and eat like Fallout New Vegas, and yet there's so much more to the game than its base similarities. First of all, there's the setting. After Fallout 4 and Borderlands 3, I developed wasteland fatigue and grew bored of traversing and rummaging through concrete ruins and bombed-out landscapes. The Halcyon system features planets and space stations to explore that have their own unique visual identities, flora and fauna, and corporate influence. Terra 2 is home to mud farmers and frontier folk pining to find their way into Byzantium, a rapture-like golden city reserved for Halcyon's best and brightest. The sulfur-ridden Monarch and abandoned Scylla represent the corporation's cold outlook towards failure, in which broken and non-profitable projects are swept under the rug and forgotten under penalty of a severe pay reduction. A planet's individual playspace might not be as large as most other open-world games, but they are still sizable playgrounds. For example, the game gets a lot of mileage out of Terra 2, making it the setting for 3 major areas that unlock as you progress through the story. Another element of the Outer Worlds that separates it from Bethesda's franchises are the party members you can ally with. With the exception of Fisto, I can't name too many characters from Fallout that had the same impact as Parvati, Vicar Max, and Nyoka. There's a near Mass Effect level of quality when it comes to secondary characters given life through extensive backstories and personal journeys that go deep into the weeds. Companion quests offer a front row seat to some compelling moments of personal growth, like seeing a man of the law struggling to find enlightenment, a down-home country gal stepping off planet for the first time, and a young upstart forced to question a reunion with a long-lost authority figure. You're limited to working with 2 party members at any given time, switching them out whenever you leave your ship, and apart from narrative flavor, they offer some pretty great boons to your gameplay experience. Party members level up with you, though not in the traditional sense where you're spending points on their own skills. Instead, you'll pick from a list of different perks that boost their own abilities as well as the main character. There's a lot of shooting to be done in the Halcyon system, and thankfully combat feels on par with Destiny and Borderlands. No dice rolls or chances to hit here. The Outer Worlds might not have nearly as many guns as Borderlands, but there's a quality over quantity element that makes it easier to stick with one much longer than you would in the Gearbox shooter. Weapons fall within the classic categories: pistols, machine guns, shotguns, and heavy weapons that fire standard bullets, or elemental-based types like poison, shock, and fiery plasma. Melee weapons have their use, though you'll get the most out of them if you spec your character's skills that way. I favored guns, opting to spend all my points there enough times so I could specify which areas to focus on, long range and heavy for me. Any weapons and gear you don't want can be equipped to your companions, thereby boosting their attack and defense. And you'll want to do that because you and your companions feel relatively weak during the early game. I often struggled to keep myself alive against enemies that hit really hard and soak up tons of damage. I took my lumps though, and with enough time and leveling up, I reached a point where combat encounters usually are over before they start, the opposition getting precious few moments to unload on me before they're totally blown away. What I really like is that companions require less babysitting and could easily hold their own without me having to find ways to intervene. As people, the companions are great, and while I found their stories to be quite compelling, it was the range of unique special attacks that got me to love them. And they're really super easy to use. Just paint a target with your reticle and push the corresponding button on the D-pad for the character you want to attack with, and they're off and running. The player character doesn't own any special abilities like the companion, instead makes use of a special effect called Tactical Time Dilation that slows things down to a crawl for a limited time. TTD drains slowly when triggered, slow enough to move your cursor over a target and gather information about them and what sort of effect your guns will have, like blindness or crippled limbs. All of these systems, party members, lots of different gun types, TTD, make for an enjoyable combat experience that'll have you coming back for more. The majority of my time with the Outer Worlds has been fantastic, although I developed some concerns the deeper I got into the game. Shockingly enough, this is Obsidian's most stable release, free from the technical problems that have plagued some of their titles in the past. No, the biggest point of contention for me were the load times. Loading screens are far too frequent as they mark the transition from open world spaces to smaller, more instance-like areas and back again. I really grew impatient with having to sit through so many transitions, 2 for getting in and out of your ship, 2 for entering and leaving a building, etc, etc. And I could only laugh at the same advertisements for so long. I'd like to say that this is the cost of getting a well-oiled Obsidian game, but let's hope a patch fixes it somewhere down the line. Another thing that bugged me were the overall uselessness of a supermarket's worth of consumable items. Outside of the primary healing tool, you'll find everything from candy bars to a foodstuff that blends corn with tobacco that add timed buffs and other useful effects. These goods are essential in the early parts of the game given the weakness of your character, and after about 22 hours, I found them to be barely worth the coin earned from selling them to vendors. My inventory was stuffed to the gills with food and drink I never used because the combination of the healing aerosol spray, better stats, and perks specifically chosen for their health and armor benefits have made me and my party fairly resilient against most enemies and bosses Halcyon has to offer. Similarly, the amount of guns that become available later on is something I ignored because I happened to find and regularly tinkered with 4 weapons that really kicked ass in a fight. Increasing the difficulty might shake things up enough, but I've hit a pretty good and empowering stride on normal that I don't see much reason to change it despite the plateau. In the end though, I'm not going to come down so hard on the Outer Worlds over these concerns because the fact of the matter is, this is the most fun I've had with a game of this type in a long time. And although the game liberally borrows from Bethesda's franchise, it succeeds purely on the spectacle and wonder of the in-game universe. Hopping from one planet to another is a fun surprise because you won't know what sort of cockamamie halcyon scheme awaits. The Faceless Corporation is a character unto itself. Its uber-capitalist behavior makes for great comic relief through numerous ill-timed slogans, advertisements, and memos. You can really tell that the game's writers had a lot of fun coming up with the material. And when the game ends, you're treated to a narrated slideshow that presents the long-term impact your actions had on the colony. My slideshow was pretty positive, and I'm really happy with how my story ended. In a year that saw Bethesda take a pummeling over its tone-deaf approach to Fallout 76, Obsidian swooped in and totally ate their lunch. They succeeded where Bethesda stumbled, delivering a gaming experience that is stable, respects the player, and wants to show them a good time.